Hello, Internet. This is Jeremiah Bean, and David Drake is on the other side. Hello,
That's
David.
me. Hi.
Hey, hey. Welcome to
Hi.
the Internet show. I noticed some people call podcasts radio shows. Why do they do that? Is
Some
that?
of them actually are on like a live radio, sort of XM radio thing, and podcasts. Those are
There we go.
the big hitting ones.
Okay. Well, that's where we need to go next, then. Obviously. Um. Yeah. So how was your weekend, man? We were going to record yesterday, but you had a drive.
I had quite a drive. I went through the mountains of western Colorado, and there was just no signal. It was kind of scary. You don't realize how much you rely on the cloud of knowledge that is the internet to get you through life until you're like, oh, now where do I turn off? No signal, no maps. I went into panic mode. I was like, I've got a map in the back of my car somewhere, but how do you use a map?
Oh man, that's crazy. You pull over to ask for directions, and they're just like, "You're a long way from home, boy."
You got a pretty mouth. That's the wrong
Yeah.
part of the country.
Yeah, that's my side of the country.
Not everybody threatens to rape you when you ask them for directions. That's like a Mississippi problem.
Yeah, man. When we were driving down to wrestling that one time, there's some real sketch parts, man. It's weird because they're like in a big city, someone could walk by, like if you go to New York or LA, someone walks by with like a mohawk and like two dead babies on spikes on their shoulders. No one gives a fuck. Like no one even looks at them twice.
They probably just think they work for Planned Parenthood.
Yeah. That's topical. We can bring that up later. But but you're in a really scary place when they give you the looks they probably should be giving those people to like if you're just not from around here. Everyone just watches you. There's people on the porch just like watching you. I'm like, the hell's wrong with you? Yeah, and they're just like you're the most entertaining thing that's ever come through these parts. It's weird. So yeah, we get that a lot down here. Oh my god. Anyway, so you were lost. That's unfortunate.
Yeah, so that's why I spent probably 9 or 10 hours on the road yesterday. So I was unable to record our Sunday podcasts.
You son of a bitch, you're the worst.
I
That's okay.
know.
We did the game theory with JT. Funny, I asked him on and he was like, yeah, sure. What are you gonna do? And I was like, gaming as comfort, like to kind of deal with like depression and stuff. And he was like, I don't think that has to do with anything religious. And I was like, no, for game theory, not God theory. Because I guess we've had him on here like twice already or 3 times. So we got it done though.
He's like, that's kind of my thing, religion.
Yeah. Yeah. But anyway, yeah, so good. I'm glad you've been listening to so much Harry Potter on book, you freaking nerd.
Yeah, I actually have never read Harry Potter. I'm one of the 2% of the population who hasn't. But I do have an agreement with a coworker that she will get high for the first time if I read all the Harry Potters this summer. So I've been putting it off all summer long, but I'm finally doing it. It's for the greater good.
There's some pun to be made about Potter and that, but I don't know what it is yet. I'll think about it. Maybe by the end of the episode, I'll have some witticism. That's definitely witticism. Sit and think about it.
Yes, that's what they call it. Yeah, she's calling. We got it scheduled for Friday. She's calling it Pot for Potter, and it's going to be quite the party.
That's hilarious, dude. I hope she has a similar experience that I did, where just fucking freak out, be in your closet, just staring at a stopwatch.
Fetal position.
Yeah.
The plan is I've never seen Howl's Moving Castle, so we're going to watch that high, which I can only imagine is going to be really sweet.
What is that?
It's a really famous Miyazaki kind of anime movie from the late 80s, early 90s, but it's supposed to be one of the better ones.
Okay. Cool. Sounds good. Yeah, but we're not talking about that here. While you were gone, David, and I didn't have you to talk to, I was so lonely on the internet. It's just a series of tubes of just me floating around.
No,
David, it's like in Superman when where they get on that like
yeah, in the little black panel.
Yeah, it just that's freaked me the fuck out as a kid. I was like, where are they going?
The Phantom Zone? That's a scary name.
She's like, I think they just spin forever, and I'm like, and I had existential crisis about forever anyway. When my mom told me one time, I was like, so when you get to heaven, what happens? She's like, nothing. I was like, what do you mean? She's like, you just have a great time. I'm like, but when does it end? She's like, it doesn't end. I was like, what? And she's like, well, it just never ends. I'm like, but what if I want it to end? And she's like, well, I mean, I don't know. I think that's suicide. And I'm like, then I go to hell? And she's like, well, yeah, I don't know. I'm sure if you want to quit, you can quit. And I'm like, I'm sure I'll get bored of it at some point. But anyway, that's how it was this week on the internet. And because all of a sudden, this is like a big deal. So the Mormon church, and not to talk about them too often, but seeing as you're something of a expert on the Mormon Church.
Yeah.
At least you've got a history with him, a long, drawn-out history.
Any ex-Mormon you meet, it's probably going to be something of an expert because you do a lot of studying about Mormon history before you figure out that it's all a sham. So and we've all kind of got like bachelor's degrees in Mormonism on some level. Like we put a lot of hours into it.
Yeah, man, I believe it. I remember we had to go to seminary in the morning, which is like you just Bible study in the morning, but you go through Old Testament, New Testament, Book of Mormon, and then the Doctrines and Covenants after that. I didn't go to that fourth one. But yeah, just so much indoctrination, man. Just Mondays, Wednesdays, Sundays. There's fireside gatherings. There's outings. There's like sports events. There's Cub Scouts. It's seriously
dances. Yeah. They take up a lot of your time.
They just
and then 2 years as a missionary.
Yeah. And then oh god, it's crazy. And then they probably call you to serve inside the church somewhere.
And if you go to BYU, there's you basically get a minor in Mormon studies anyway because they make you take so many hours of Book of Mormon classes, Doctrine and Covenants classes. Like it's all part of the required core.
That's crazy, man. But anyway, okay, so this big thing happened, and it's part of a series of problems because I guess the Mormon church found out that there was a leader. I don't recall which one, but he was one of the presidents or one of the apostles or whatever in the upper echelon, and he said there's a great apostasy happening. It's akin to one of them that happened a long time ago in the Mormon church history. I don't recall it because I had no point of reference. But,
so in Nauvoo, Joseph Smith tried to make his own bank. As part of his scheme for, he was a poor farmer and anything he could do to get out of manual labor, like he would try it. So one of his schemes was to create a bank and they found out that was illegal. And so he's like, okay, we'll make an anti-banking society. Like, what's that? He's like, it's like a bank, but it's not a bank. And he just kind of like scratches his face. I'm like, oh, okay, sounds legit. So he gets everybody to invest in this anti-banking society and eventually collapses. So they start printing up their own money and everything. The whole thing collapses and this huge apostasy happened where everyone started leaving the church because they lost a lot of money, right? Like that's what you do typically if you get scammed is you either like double down or you get out. And so a lot of people left, and that's what he's referring to. He says like there hasn't been an apostasy of this size since that event in Nauvoo.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, yeah. Okay. So it's a big deal. And, we see this across all the churches, right? I don't know what the percentage is on Mormon and the non-Mormon goes, but we know that it's a big chunk, like, and we see these in the polls too. People are just becoming, I'm religious. They're not claiming themselves as atheists, but they're just saying, I'm not religious, or I'm not particularly religious if they're like super moderate Christian. But, so they're panicking. Like one of the problems is they found out, they said they did research. I don't know what that means when lay people say research, but they said they did research and that most people are leaving because they found shit on the internet. They were saying they had some revelation from the internet. They would come across some articles on the internet or what have you. Yeah,
it used to be to find out the truth about Mormon history, you had to go into archives, you had to go into libraries to find like source documents. It was pretty hard. You had to be pretty dedicated. But, since the advent of Google, they're just hemorrhaging members 30 and under just because they started learning how to use the internet and look things up. And the evidence gets pretty damning at that point.
Yeah, that's crazy. And so one of the ways that they're countering this is, I don't think this is going to go in their favor, but they decided to just say, fuck it, we'll do it live. We'll do it live. Fuck it. It's a Bill O'Reilly reference, but so that's what they said. They just said, let's start releasing stuff from these. I guess they have secret vaults or something.
Yeah, they got vaults in Salt Lake City that have a lot of, you used to have to be super secure. Like even the janitors need a temple recommend to even clean down there. And they would let historians go in there and look through it, but then they had to filter everything the historians published. In fact, in the 90s, there was this huge purge of Mormon historians who started publishing things that weren't favorable to the church's image.
Really?
Right. I'm trying to remember who they were. They call them the September 6 or the September 9 or something. There's a bunch of them that just got excommunicated.
September 11th.
Right. And then there were a bunch of BYU professors, also history professors or church history professors who got kicked out. And so they've been very controlling about what gets in and what gets out of there. But the Community of Christ, which is an offshoot of the Mormon church, used to be called the Reorganized Church of Jesus Christ, they are a little more like out in the open about their history. They don't really, they're more of a metaphorical belief in all this stuff. Like, Joseph Smith was a con man, but it's okay. We live happy lives kind of scenario. Like they're very moderate compared to the mainstream Mormons. And so they've been collaborating with their historians and the Mormon historians to kind of release this series called the Joseph Smith Papers Project, where they're actually releasing his diaries, his journals, things he wrote. And on top of that, the Mormon hierarchy has released a set of anonymously written essays that kind of address tricky issues of church doctrine, like Joseph Smith's polygamy, racism, blacks not getting the priesthood, things like that, in an effort to say like, oh, well, we've been open about this all the time. If you're getting surprised by this, that's your own fault. Because normally when people leave, they feel the sense of betrayal, right? Like, why wasn't I ever told this? So now they have kind of a, well, look, we've never tried to hide this stuff. It's all right there, because these essays are written with a very positive spin on them, like a very apologist twist. So they're trying to paint, Joseph Smith. Like, okay, for example, my favorite part is in the polygamy essay. Joseph Smith had a series of wives beyond Emma Smith, right? And that is kind of unknown to some members. We know Brigham Young was a polygamist, but the fact that Joseph Smith was doing it is not highly publicized. But what a lot of people don't know is that his youngest wife was 14 years old, which, whoa, despite the way the apologists try to twist it, that wasn't common even in the 1800s. Like, the average age of a married woman was 22, 23 in the 1800s, not 14. That was still illegal back then. And but when you read the essay, it says the youngest of his wives was a few months shy of 15, or like almost 15 or something. Like, that makes it better. They don't say 14 years old. They're like, yeah, she was basically 15. It's still messed up. Jesus. And also, she was 14. Let's be honest.
Wow. Okay, so these things start coming out, and then that shakes people's faith, and they feel betrayed.
Or they double down because they read it with this apologist. It's like an inoculation. The truth is a virus, but if you get a little shot of the truth with a Mormon spin on it, then you can be like, oh yeah, that's no big deal. I already knew about that stuff, when you get presented with the issues later.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's almost like sunk cost fallacy at that point as well.
Yeah.
I mean, like, nobody wants to admit they were duped. I mean, that sucks. I even find myself, even now, like, I've been practicing for a long time because, in academia, you know how it is. You can't go in there with any kind of ego about your opinions or your well, research beliefs. Because at some point you're like, oh shit, there's been a point where you were dead wrong and you were saying something that was just wrong. And someone's like, yeah, no, it's usually a faculty member, and they make you look like an idiot. And you have to just be like, oh, I'm sorry, I was completely wrong. And, even though we get a lot of practice with that, man, there's some times where I'm like I was in an argument with Amy, and I was like, I wouldn't do that. That would be dumb. Why would I? And, we were kind of joking, but it was kind of serious too. It started getting serious. And so, I started to notice that I was getting a little ego into it. I was just like, why would I do that? I wouldn't do that. Like, I wouldn't be 12 minutes early to jiu-jitsu. I would say, well, we live 4 minutes away. And she's like, oh, look, here, you sent a message. It's blank 40 or 3:48. And I was like, well, I probably sent that. Okay, yeah, you're right. I sent that in the parking lot. Dang it. So you're saying that apologists, or some people read this and they probably feel this feeling too of like, I couldn't have been duped. And
right. And so when I'm first discovering these things, I'd never had any exposure to it. So I just feel betrayed, and that kind of overwhelms my sunk cost kind of ego, and going like, oh man, I was super duped. But the anger kind of helps you like accept it, because you feel like a victim. But the strategy here is to make these essays so they can say like, well, you were never duped. We've been open about this the whole time. But they don't publicize the fact that these essays exist. Like, the average member in the pews has never heard of them. Even stake presidents, bishops, like, they don't know about them. Like, I've asked bishops and like higher level leaders in the local leadership. I'm like, well, what about those essays? And like, what essays? This is news in ex-Mormon and sometimes in skeptical communities, but the membership doesn't know about it. So it's really genius. They release these essays, they hide them in some obscure part of their webpage, and then they can point back and say, we've always been honest about our history. Look at these essays. We've already addressed all that.
Oh god, so shady, dude.
Yeah.
It's fucked up.
It's super shady.
So before, it sounds like to get a hold of all this information, you really had to be so deep in. You're not gonna, like, you're more likely to double down, because I mean, if you're digging through archives, like you said, archives, and if you're in the temple anyway, I mean, you're kind of all in at that point.
Right. Like, that's even the historians that they allowed into the archives all had to be upstanding members with paying their tithing, going through the temple, all that stuff. So they're all on board.
You said temple recommend. What is that?
Okay, so there's kind of two tiers of adult Mormons. There's the temple recommend holders. That means that once every couple years you go in, you see your bishop, and he asks you a bunch of questions like, do you drink coffee? all the stuff that Mormons are supposed to do, he'll interview on them. And the most important question is, are you paying a full tithing, which is a full 10% of your income? If you can say yes to all those questions that he wants you to say yes to and no to the ones you're supposed to say no to, then you get a temple recommend, which is good for a couple of years, which means like you're a member in good standing. I'd say that's probably 30, 35, maybe 40% of the adult membership. And then everybody else, they can't get into the temple, which is where the highest level of blessings are. That's how you get into super VIP heaven.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember going, and I remember it was like it was kind of a status, thing, because they would say things like, "Oh, well, I just went. Did you go to the temple last time?" And,
right.
And somebody would be
People
like,
will post
"No."
on Facebook like date night with my wife, and it'll be a picture of the temple, and you just go through, and it's the most monotonous thing. You just go through these kind of Masonic rituals over and over. You repeat the same things. You're doing work for the dead, which means you're doing ordinances in proxy for dead things. It sounds crazy now that I say it out loud, but it just seems normal when you're in it. But it definitely is a status symbol. And then the youth actually get a special youth pass that gets them into like part of the temple, not like the super secret stuff, but the baptismal stuff. So like even from a young age, like you want to get your little temple recommend and go to the temple.
Yeah, I remember that part. It's got a little playground on it. It's called Cults for Kids. No, no. Yeah, and I remember going there, and they're like, "Oh, we're doing baptisms for the dead," and I'd heard about those, but I didn't ask any questions on the write up, and I was like, because I got a temple recommend, even though it was Bishop Friend. I don't know if you remember him. He really liked me, and so he's like, "I'm going to give you one anyway." Even though he's like, "Do you know, have you shared your testimony?" Which just means that you literally walk up and you say, "I know that this church is true and that Joseph Smith is a prophet," and then I think that's it, right?
You can say whatever you want, but they typically have a few common themes. Like, I know the church is true. I know insert current prophet here is a prophet. I love my family. Here's a random story about how I found my keys one day and I was praying for it. Like, just whatever would build your faith or build the faith of the congregation. It's just, if you repeat it, and they've literally said this in youth pamphlets, it's like a testimony is found in the bearing of it, which if you decipher that from Mormonese means, if you say it enough times, you'll start to believe it. And that's the principle going on with bearing your testimony.
It's crazy, man. But he asked me if I had done that. I was like, no. And you'll notice that if whenever I give, they'll select members of the public to go up and give talks. That's what Mormon church is like. It's weird. It's not like the bishop isn't a pastor. He's just like a leader of the church. But like they pick people from the audience to do stuff. So I gave 2 talks. And at the end, you're supposed to do your bear your testimony, and I never did. And because I was just like, I'm new. I always gave an excuse, like, I'm new. I'm just kind of looking into this. And I was like, been there like 2 years at that point, but I was never a full-on member. But Bishop Friend let me go. He was like, you know what? You're a good person. I think this will be a learning experience and do nothing but strengthen your faith. Bullshit. I got there and they were like, hey, there's these huge basins. And I'm like, oh yeah? And they're like, yeah, there's 12 oxen holding them up. And I'm like, oh, what? And they're marble.
They represent the 12 tribes of Israel. Why is that weird?
Yeah, and I was like, it looks fucking creepy. And they're like, that's okay. You'll just get in there for water, and we'll say some dead people's names that we found, and you get to say, I'm that person, and then take the baptism form. Yep. It's not creepy, but that's okay, because the whole time you're gonna look like you're in the food industry, because you're gonna have a little hat, little slippers, like all white clothes that you're wearing.
Yeah,
like
you don't have the hat or slippers for the baptisms. That's for the adult rituals, but you do have these white jumpsuits.
Well, we walked in them. We took them. I think we took our shoes off whenever we went in, but I had the little hat thing first.
There was no hat. That's the fallibility of memory. The baker's hat, you probably saw a picture of the internet or something and like confounded them. The little baker's hat you get when you go through for your endowments, which is later on, like when you're an adult.
Oh man, I could swear.
Yeah.
That you wear the little like hairnet. It's like a little shitty little hairnet looking thing. No?
No.
Okay. I don't know. I don't even know if you went on that one with me, but I'm sure you went to the same one. I think it was the Nauvoo one or something.
Yeah, we went to Nauvoo. We went to one in Texas, I think, like Dallas. There was a temple there. But what I remember, one thing is that the white jumpsuits I was all about as a teenager, like watching the girls go through and get theirs, because I was like, ooh, what white? It's like a wet t-shirt contest, and I was trying to like hide the boner I was getting in the temple. Like I felt super guilty about it. Like that jumpsuit's really clinging to my girlfriend right now. That's pretty awkward, because anything sets you off when you're 16 to begin with. And so it was pretty guilt-inducing.
Yeah, I can imagine, like in this holy place, But anyway, so they're releasing all this information about all this creepy shit, right? And one of the most recent one, for some reason, this one blew up. I don't hear about any of the other ones, but all of a sudden they released the what they call the Seer stones.
Pictures of one of the Seer stones that Joseph Smith was supposed to have used.
Yeah. So how did he use these seer stones? This seems to be
Okay,
a
and
lot of-
this is where it gets murky, and there's a lot of people confused about this because
Yeah.
the church has two different stories going on. So the one story that the church kind of gives you overall is that when Joseph Smith, okay, so if you guys have seen the South Park episode about Mormonism, like that's
Yeah.
pretty much dead on. Like he goes to a hill that's basically in his backyard, like it's pretty close to where he lives. An angel tells him there's plates hidden there. He keeps going back. An angel keeps stopping him, like, no, now is not yet the time. You are still unworthy. And it's very, if you study folklore, it follows some very common folklore tropes. Like, if you go there seeking it for riches, then you will be denied the treasure. So he keeps on going there, and he keeps being tempted by the gold, and he keeps being denied. Like, come back a year, and it has to be on the equinox every time he comes back, and all this stuff. And he has to bring somebody with him, and eventually he brings his wife and makes her stay in the carriage and just goes off and does it by himself. But eventually he gets these plates, and in the stone box that the gold plates were in, there was something called the Urim and Thummim. And you Old Testament scholars will probably recognize those words as something that Hebrew priest would wear, or the high priest would wear, is like a weird breastplate with stones in it. And so Joseph Smith describes it as this breastplate with these weird stones that are kind of like spectacles that come out of it. It looks super weird. But that's the story that the church kind of tells, is that he uses the Urim and Thummim, he looks through it, and when he looks at the plates with those spectacles, he sees the words kind of change into English from the Reformed Egyptian that they were written in. Now, there's an app, Google Translate, if you get on your phone, you can actually hold it up to things and it will change it to whatever language you're looking at it. It's pretty cool. But that's how they describe the Urim and Thummim working, is you look at it and then the sentences would appear and he would read the sentences out and the scribe would write them down. That's where the Book of Mormon comes from. But also, there's something called a seer stone that gets a lot less discussion. Like, I'd never heard of it for most of my life in the church because this is one of those things that only the historians knew about. So the 1800s, people were superstitious. They were super superstitious, right?
Like, they were just stitious. These guys were superstitious.
They were extremist superstitious. Mega superstitious.
Mega stitious. Yeah.
Mega stitious. And so they had this magical thinking down. And so they would have like dowsing rods, right? Like they were all about the dowsing rods because, you know, you're farmers. It's a dry summer. You need water. Anything, you know how superstitions work. Anything that might work, they're going to buy into because they need it to work. Yeah. And one of the ways they would find water or find lost objects is something called a seer stone. And you might have seen these on like the classic fortune teller thing with the crystal ball, and you look into it and you see the future, you see secrets appear. Like that's the premise of that comes from these seer stones, where you find a weird rock and you stare into it and it starts to give you secrets.
What the fuck? That's like Melisandre in the fire.
Exactly. No, but people, this wasn't just Joseph Smith. Like a lot of people, they were just dumb farmers, right? Like they didn't have a scientific worldview yet. They weren't dumb. They were intelligent. Like Joseph Smith was incredibly creative, but he didn't have a scientific worldview. He had a magical worldview. And it's hard to like put ourselves into those minds, but people were like, oh, that seems legit, right? So one day he's digging a well and he finds this rock and he becomes known for its ability to find hidden treasure. Like there were rumors of Spanish gold hidden all up and down the east coast of the United States, right? Like from pirates or whatever. And so he used to get hired, him and his dad would get hired to like use his magic stone and say, okay, start digging here. And they dig and dig and dig. And get this, when they get down to where it was supposed to be, there wouldn't be anything, surprisingly, right? And so he'd say, oh, we got so close and these little fucking gnomes came and they grabbed it right when we got really close.
What?
Yeah. And people would be like, oh, that sounds right, because that's what gnomes do. Because again, this is how people used to think back then. And so he's like, okay, wait, I'm getting another image. All right, there's actually treasure over here. And they would keep doing it. In fact, there's lawsuits on the records of him being, because one of his employers got like pissed at him because they were like, wait a minute, you're a con man. And so he was convicted of being a con artist. I forget what the 19th century term for it was, like a charlatan or something, right? Mm-hmm. He was convicted of it. And anyway, this seer stone they found when he was digging for the rocks.
It's probably hobnobbery. Haberdashery.
Haberdashery. That's funny you should say that, because he ended up using a hat in his seer stone thing. So
what? Why?
Okay, so when he finds the plates, which nobody was allowed to see, just himself, until he shows these three witnesses, and then they say, yeah, we saw it, but it was like in a spiritual sense. Like we didn't see the physical plates, but we saw a vision of them. And they're like, oh, okay, so it's like a group-induced hallucination. Awesome. But when they found the plates, Here's how eyewitnesses who were actually helping him with the translation described it. He would put the seer stone, the Urim and Thummim didn't even come up. Nobody ever saw those. He'd take the seer stone, he'd put it into a hat, and he'd cover his, he put his hands around his eyes to block the light out, and he'd put his head into the hat. And then, because it was so dark, he could see the glowing writing on the seer stone.
Wait, hold on. The seer stone. Where were the plates?
No, not even in the room.
What? Whenever I was told about this, like it was that other version.
Yeah, and in fact, there's several pictures of Joseph Smith, like in the Enzyme, which is the church magazine, or in like the instruction books. It's just him with the plates on the table, and his scribe is on the other side, and he's just looking at the plates, and the scribe's writing them down.
Yeah.
If you Google image Joseph Smith translating the plates, you'll see a lot of those. Those are from church publications. But if you actually read the history, and the church was aware of this, the plates weren't even in the room. He'd have a curtain up so the other guy couldn't see what was going on in there, and then he'd stick his head in a hat and he would read the peat stone, or as most critics think, he would just read what he'd already written down, for the Book of Mormon. And so, yeah, that's a little misleading. And in fact, in the 185 years that the Ensign has been a church publication, they've actually mentioned the stone in the hat method of translation exactly twice. Wow. And the rest of the time, they're doing the other story. So the church has known about this for a while, but they never publicized it until this recent essay about translation. And then they released this image of the seer stone. Oh, and that was the other thing is when Joseph Smith finished translating the Book of Mormon, the story was that an angel, Moroni, came down and took the golden plates and the Urim and Thummim back up into heaven. So these stones, these Urim and Thummim, had been preserved for thousands of years in the ground, and then an angel came and took them away. Now, wouldn't it make more sense for the angel just to, instead of preserving them in the ground, just give them to him and then take them back? But whatever. They were supposed to be taken back up into heaven, but we never learned what happened to the seer stone. Turns out this stone that Joseph Smith found in a well was actually in the church archives or the Community of Christ archives. It's unclear about who actually owned them, because when the church is split, the reorganized Church of Jesus Christ, later the Community of Christ, got to keep a lot of the artifacts and historical monuments. So one of the two groups has had it this whole time, and they just now released it in a picture as part of the Joseph Smith Papers project.
What the fuck, man? Yeah, these things came out, and like I came across them because it made big ripples on Reddit. Like a lot of people were saying things like, it made it on Ask Geology, which is a subreddit. And so these geologists got on there and they're like, yeah, there's absolutely nothing remarkable about those stones. And then the crazy thing is, though, there was a ton on Ask Geology, a ton of these like Mormon apologetics getting on there. And I suspect that it could have been like the church organizing them, because they're never on Ask Geology. What the fuck do they care? Geologists disagree with their viewpoint. But yeah,
it's funny. Go ahead.
They were just like saying things like, well, because somebody was like, well, this is completely unremarkable. It definitely is something you could find like in the, the Midwest or in upstate Northeast. And, it's called a banded jade or something. You can look it up. But, and these people are like, that's perfect. Yeah. And that's the thing, magic doesn't need, it can come through any rock, and all these people. And I was like, who the fuck are you? This is actually geology. What are you doing here? And then some of them got downvoted, but a lot of people were just curious about what the story was. And then they start arguing with each other because, like, well, the seer stone wasn't even used in the translation. That people don't know that. It was Urim and Thummim, which is kind of like these glasses he put on. And then this other guy goes, no, actually, I'm a bishop here, and it was both. He put both of them in the hat. And this other guy goes, I'm a bishop too, and it's actually he just used a seer stone. So I never knew what the story was.
Yeah, and they're all right. Like the church has released all of those different stories, but the most common one was that he would use the Urim and Thummim, and the seer stone was kind of like the more rare way of describing it, but that's how all the people who were like eyewitnesses to the process described it. So it's super shady. In fact, anyone that wants to like actually read, there's a very long essay that describes the church's position and the critics' position. It's on this website called mormonthink.com. You just type in like seer stone or translation of the Book of Mormon. It'll have all that stuff here. There's a picture of the seer stone itself. It looks just like an egg, like a brown egg with like light brown swirls on it. But yeah, it's a great site for actually seeing the problems with the church, and then it's pretty fair. It shows like both positions, but you can kind of tell the apologetic position's kind of bullshit when you look at it objectively. So it's accused of being an anti-Mormon site, but that's because truth is sort of anti-Mormon, like objectivity is kind of anti-Mormon.
Yeah.
But these essays that they've released, I'm going to read you the topics because there's a lot of them. People don't know about them. There's one called Race and the Priesthood, which talks about how blacks couldn't have the priesthood until the late 70s, like long after the civil rights movement. There's plural marriage. There's plural marriage, Kirtland and Nauvoo. There's plural marriage, the manifesto. There's first vision accounts, because Joseph Smith has like 6 or 7 different accounts of his first vision of God, and they're all slightly different or completely different from each other. And the one that we tell you as missionaries is like the church approved version, but there's 6 or 7 others that just were also there. And so they're trying to explain why that is. There's Book of Mormon translation, which describes the seer stone in the hat. There's Book of Mormon and DNA, which kind of explains why when you test the DNA of American Indians, there's not anything Hebrew about it, which kind of goes against the whole premise of the Book of Mormon. Yeah. There's a Book of Abraham, which is actually what got me out of the church. It's the Book of Abraham is this translation of an Egyptian papyrus that Joseph Smith bought off of a wandering mummy salesman. It's a crazy story. But he sees these papyrus. He's like, oh, this is actually written by Abraham while he was living in Egypt. And he starts translating it. And it's just a common funeral text. It's got nothing to do with Abraham. It's not even from the same century or the same millennium that Abraham would have lived had he been a real character, like in history. Like it's as wrong as you could possibly be. Like everything about it is wrong. There's an essay about becoming like God. Mormons believe that the highest level of heaven is actually godhood, which was one of the cooler things about the theology, I think, because you don't become a flunky forever like in most Christian religions where you're just singing praises and plumbing harps. You just become a dungeon master, essentially, start creating your own campaigns. And then there's one about peace and violence, which I have no idea, probably about the mob wars, the Mormon-Missouri wars. And then there's one called Are Mormons Christian? Which I always thought was a dumb debate. Like, you guys aren't Christian. I don't know. They worship Jesus Christ. Like they're weird, but they're like technically Christian. They've got Jesus Christ in huge font size on their names.
Yeah, and if they're not, it's just a technicality. Who cares?
Right, right. It's like, well, you think that Jesus Christ came to New York? That's stupid. We all know that he walked on water and was a dead Jewish zombie that came to life, but your thing is crazy.
Yeah. It's like when football people argue and they're like, basketball's not a real sport. And I'm like, I don't even know what that means. If it's different than football, yes, but I don't.
It sounds like could Picard beat Han Solo in a fight? Like, who cares?
I do, and there's no way.
It's interesting, but yeah, for sure. But yeah, check it out, mormonthink.com. You can find all kinds of weird stuff that's in Mormon history. Like any one of these things is enough to make you leave the church if you're a Mormon. I just happened to find the Book of Abraham thing first. That's what got me out. But they're all crazy. It's all crazy pants. But I'm surprised that the Seer stone thing has gotten so much traction outside of ex-Mormon circles. Like, I'd heard about it for a long time, and then JT asked me for a quote. And I was like, what, you're blogging about this? And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, who cares? Like, how is this even remotely interesting if you're not a Mormon or a former Mormon?
Dude, a lot of people don't even know about the translation story. They just say, oh, he got golden plates, and he translated them. And then they're like, oh, it's Seer stone. And then people probably Wikipedia'd it, and we're like, what the fuck? And then they start realizing the weird shit about Mormon church. And I think the cool thing is that, so somebody put it this way in the comment section of this Reddit post, and this was posted in a lot of different Reddits. There was pics. It was under pics, just regular pictures. It was about atheism. It was on Ask Geology. That was the huge one. And then it was about change my position, which is another one. Change my position on something, and you say something you believe and you want your mind changed, which is an interesting psychological thing. But anyway, the interesting thing someone said in this comment section was this. They said, now the religions, all religions are probably bullshit, but or at least everybody out there believes that most religions are bullshit. So, and then a big chunk of those believe that theirs isn't, but most of them believe that most religions are bullshit, right? Right. And so with this one, the interesting thing about Mormonism is that it occurred so close to modern science that we can kind of disprove it. And so geology, if they can prove that this is not what it says, then that's good. But unfortunately, it was another one of these, gray areas. It was like, well, there's nothing significant about it. It's definitely a river pebble. It's this kind, and it's probably from here. There's actually some kind of mine. It's that has that stuff that makes it reddish, and then gives it that glossy glaze. There's a mine right up in the Northeast. There's a guy who was a geologist from that area who did his PhD work on that mine, and he's like, yeah, I'm pretty sure. He goes, I did my PhD on this. I'm pretty sure it's just this thing. And first people were like, no, it's a magic rock. And then later they changed their position later in that same comment thread, and they're like, those people shut up, and a whole new group shut up, and they're like, yeah, it's supposed to be common. That's fine. It was just magical because God made it magical so they could see it. It was just weird. And so, like, it's interesting because we can weigh in on these things, and like for the first time we could be like, oh, dude. I know exactly what that is. Not
Yeah.
like, oh, is it a piece
But it's like
of
Noah's Ark,
art?
right? Like when you point out the logistical problems, they're like, yeah, but God, so magic. And so like there's no way to disprove magic,
Yeah.
So it's I don't know, when JT was asking me for comments, I said I talked about how the church is trying to jump in front of the internet with like these essays. But the comment section on that article that they first announced it on was just cracking me up, because you read comments like, I really feel the spirit looking at this rock. And I'm reading that and I'm like, well, it's a nice little historical find. I compare it to finding George Washington's glasses, except, one was the father of our country, the other was a pedophile.
Yeah.
But beyond that, it's just kind of, but everyone's like, oh, this rock is great. And in fact, some of the church apologists have already kind of released these articles saying like, well, it makes perfect sense that you'd have to block the light out. It's like trying to read an iPhone when it's too bright outside. Like you need to, like they compare it to an iPhone. So we're like the ex-Mormon community is talking about Seer stone and iRock.
iRock. I went to iRock. It wasn't as good as it sounds. But yeah, that's crazy pants, man. It's crazy. But
yes.
Whatever. This is so everyone knows like what this is all about. I didn't even know. Like I had asked David, and I actually didn't even ask him before the show. I'm learning a lot of this right now. So hopefully you guys know what that controversy is about, and then you'll be able to answer these. I mean, I get a lot of Mormon missionaries to my door, so be able to answer some of those. But
no, it's fun. I actually saw the Book of Mormon musical last week, so it was kind of cool to see the Matt Parker, Trey Stone version of it.
Was it funny?
Trey Parker, Matt Stone, yeah. Oh, it was hilarious. I had tears in my eyes the entire time. Like, they throw a lot of things that you had to be a Mormon insider to get, but overall, it was just a fun satire. It's actually a lot kinder to religion than I am personally. Like, the premise of the show, if you can get past the fuck you God and, like, all the blasphemy, like, if religious people would sit through and watch the whole thing instead of walk out during intermission after the Asadiga Ibuwai song, it's actually an atheist love letter to religion, because the end message is, even if your religion is ridiculous and you believe stupid things, if it makes you happy and makes you live together better and like addresses problems in the real world, then it's still helpful. And because at the end of the show, they create their own new religion that has Ewoks and Yoda and like Captain Picard and the Enterprise, and just everything that the one character, Elder Cunningham's into, like finds its way into this religion. But he's addressing things like don't rape babies, like don't be a warlord, like all these things that were relevant to that community. It was addressing through these stories that were metaphors. And they're like, of course it is not real. It is a metaphor. Salt Lake City is not a real place. And they're just like very kind of enlightened view of religion, like using religion as a storytelling tool, the way Aesop's fables are. And so it's actually very kind to religion. I actually think they didn't address how harmful religion is by making it saying like, oh, of course, that doesn't have to be real to be good. But I don't know. It was a very funny play. I'd highly recommend it. Even if you're not Mormon, you're going to think it's hilarious just because it's parodying all religions. It just uses Mormonism as the lens to criticize religion in general, but also to find the redeemable community aspects of religion and pull them out of it. So it was very nuanced. It was a good play.
Nuanced. It's actually something they do well with all their like kind of brash jokes.
Yeah,
there's always some message.
Parenting. It was about South Park, and it said, South Park is not for children. That being said, if you want your children to learn a good morality, let them watch South Park, because at the core of every episode of South Park, at least in the recent 6 seasons, the latest ones, there's a really good moral kernel to the beyond the set my balls, I'm Cartman. Like underneath that, there's usually a really good moral message, and so I don't know, it was really fun.
Huh. Well, cool. Well, thanks for setting us straight, man. And it's good to have you back. And I guess that pretty much wraps up this episode. So until then, I'll see or stone you later. Oh, man. I could not help it. It popped in my brain, and I just impulse just pushed it right into the...
Only if the angel Mariah doesn't take you up into heaven first. Am I right?
Because I'm an artifact. But anyway. Well, cool. And I guess we'll see you guys next week. Thanks for tuning in for another episode of the Game Theory. God, I do that every time. God Theory podcast. Sorry, untraining a year of training. And we will see you guys next week.